on va parler des risques évidemment, c'est la promesse de cette journée, mais maintenant on va parler des nouveaux risques. Évidemment, on ne pourra pas parler de tout, mais on a choisi de s'arrêter sur deux sujets en particulier, le réchauffement climatique et la cybermenace. On va faire le point sur ces nouveaux risques, voir comment les entreprises se préparent avec nos experts qui vont me rejoindre en plateau.
Il se prépare au réchauffement climatique, qui est là depuis 20 ans.
Quel est l'état de la menace? Comment les entreprises se préparent, évidemment, et surtout, pour rester sur une note plus positive, comment est-ce qu'on transforme tous ces risques en opportunités? Typhaine Beaupérin, bonjour. Vous êtes Chief Executive Officer. Il y a eu un gros débat à savoir si on disait directrice générale ou CEO de la Federation of European Risk Management Association. À vos côtés, Marc Darmon, senior vice-président chez Thales, Alfonso Natale, partenaire du cabinet Mckinsey, et Christophe Périllat, Chief Executive chez Valeo. On va commencer avec vous, Marc Darmon, pour planter le décor. Le nombre de cyberattaques augmente tous les ans, on le dit. Et il y a toujours ce discours, cette musique de fond qu'on entend sur un Pearl Harbor numérique, une espèce de cyberattaque XXL qui pourrait intervenir. Où est-ce qu'on en est réellement? C'est quoi la menace cyber aujourd'hui?
Alors d'abord, pourquoi la menace de cyberattaque augmente? Il y a, pour faire simple, 3 raisons. Le premier, c'est la surface d'attaque, le numérique. Le numérique qui est partout, on le sait bien, l'introduction du numérique dans tous les systèmes, les débits qui explosent, les transformations numériques des entreprises, la disruption numérique, et donc la surface augmente. Je donnerai un exemple précis tout à l'heure. Mais le deuxième qu'on connaît moins, c'est la professionnalisation des attaquants. Un cyberattaquant aujourd'hui, c'est quelqu'un qui prépare une cyberattaque comme une attaque militaire, avec préparation sur plusieurs semaines, plusieurs mois, conjugaison des moyens, et avec un vrai professionnalisme et qui se généralise. Et la troisième raison, ce sont les tensions internationales, on y reviendra peut-être, qui évidemment augmentent le domaine. Alors je voudrais revenir sur un exemple de la surface d'attaque, qui est un fun fact, le domaine spatial. On sait bien que le domaine spatial, le domaine des satellites est aujourd'hui en disruption totale avec les idées de nouvelles constellations qui nous viennent notamment des États-Unis. On considère aujourd'hui qu'il y a 10 000 satellites en l'air, ça a doublé en quelques années et ça va encore doubler dans quelques années. Donc un nombre impressionnant. Les satellites sont partout, les télécommunications évidemment, les informations sur le climat, le positionnement. On est assez fiers chez Thales que nos équipes soient les...
At Thales, our teams are the first, are the vanguard of alertness, and the European Space Agency has asked us to work on this. We've been able to change satellite directions and modify information to be found on Earth. So if you consider the number of satellites out there, you can see how much information can be attacked. So the surface of the attack has increased, and threats are many, many. We use simple ratios between the Olympics of 2020, which took place in 21, and 4 years earlier, the number of attacks was multiplied by 8. The number of incidents, small threats and large attacks, everything was multiplied by 8, a factor of 8. It should be the same ratio for the coming Olympics. So it gives you an understanding of how exponential this is. There have been 1 billion malwares out there. It was a few months ago. Malwares are generated by generative AI. Thank you for reassuring us, sir. Is there any correlation between the deterioration of the geopolitical situation and the increase in cyber attacks? I'm not pointing any fingers, but you know who I'm referring to. At Thales, we have threat analysts, and we publish plenty of our data. It's public information. So what are we talking about? Cyber threats means cyber pollution, cyber spying, and cyber sabotage. Cyber pollution has kept people busy for a long time. You know, identity theft. It's a great big problem, but strategically speaking, the consequences are minor. And also, There is spying, both industrial, political, and that is far more disturbing. And there's cyber sabotage with plants stoppages. It's terrorism, basically. So cyber spying was replaced by cyber sabotage. There are plenty of data leaks and data losses now. With regard to international crises and tensions that you're referring to, our surveys show that in Europe, 10% of cyber attacks, 10% of global cyber attacks are in Europe before the war on Ukraine.
Fin 2022,
At the end of 22, it moved to 46%. 46% of all the cyber attacks in the world take place in Europe, and it has increased further in 2023. Many countries on the border, the Nordics, Sweden, Romania, Poland, now the whole of Europe, and all infrastructure systems and critical operators are affected. But these are traditional, conventional cyber attacks due to saturation. The purpose is to block the infrastructure of a country or to block operators. A Google server was attacked with 56 million requests on one server in 1 second. Wikipedia in a single day on a single server in 1 second, no system can withstand that. So it's a saturation system, and that is, say, 3/4 cyber attacks that take place. When you say jump from 10 to 46%, well, tell us about France. So it's very much to the east of Europe, but France is right in the midst of this, of course. That cyber attacks have been on the rise, notably due to saturation attacks. Let's take a concrete example. Valeo, what is your take on the increase in cyber attacks? We measure cyber attacks. We're an industrial firm, 110,000 staffs. We have plants all over the world. Therefore, we are attacked. We have been attacked many times. And we have defense weapons. We have an army to protect us. A few figures. We get over 1 month. We have roughly 400 incidents or attacks every month. 20% are actual attacks. Attacks to steal data or to crack our system. Those are the main motivations. 20% means that there are several attacks every day. That's the order of magnitude. And I believe that all industrial firms of our size suffer the same. To us, it's a key challenge. But as I say, well, most, or if not all, industrial firms are concerned. The risks are huge. The cars, as you know, are full of onboard software. They're more and more connected. Now, a car today is 1 ton of metal or 2.5 tons of metal at 130 kilometers per hour with the people you love the most on board. And in the world, there are roughly 1.3 billion cars. Okay? Everything was straightforward up until now because cars were not connected. They were isolated from the world. The only way to update software was to go to your dealership and plug your car into their system. But things are changing, and they will change. In the future, your car will be connected. Many are today. Maybe yours is. You receive emails, text messages, you can download music and so on, which is nice, fine. And the 40, 50, or 100 computers on board will be remotely updated. Why? Well, because there's a disconnect between the software and the hardware, as is the case on your cell phones. In other words, safety functions will be affected. Braking, steering, and that is the world of tomorrow. We have plenty of software on board, and as far as Valeo is concerned, as an automotive supplier in an industry that's currently being overhauled, our aim is to protect all the software which will be on board vehicles, because vehicles should not become dangerous objects. We'll see how to face up to this. But now, Alfonso Natale. climate change. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about climate change. It's extremely complex. Things are speeding up. They're flaring up even. The threat is growing, right? It's never been as strong.
You're welcome.
So climate change is absolutely, and climate risk, it's definitely a priority in both in the business community, but also for public institutions. If you take, the last global risk report from the World Economic Forum, extreme weather has been identified as the most likely event that could generate a global crisis. And also, if you think about the severity in an horizon of 2 years, climate risk is second one, and definitely number one in a 10 years horizon. Of course, there is a landscape of new emerging risk. I think we will touch later, about AI, misinformation, disinformation, inflation, or cyber. I think we just discussed, but definitely climate is used most priority. Now, when we speak about climate, we always think about with two perspectives. On one side, climate risk mitigation, which has been the focus of many actions from both private and public institutions, and this is all about reduction of the carbon emissions and all the net zero transition. But we see growing momentum around the climate risk adaptation because, of course, we can try to mitigate the climate risk, but at some point in time, I think we need to start switching also and reflecting about how we can accelerate on the adaptation side. And in the history of the humans, essentially, the reaction to adaptation was essentially migration. So people were actually moving. Now, of course, in the current society, this is no longer an option, or at least, it's not an option in terms of migration at scale of people and assets. So we need to reflect about how we can really tackle the adaptation risk. And here, of course, we always reflect about, to address this point of a climate risk adaptation with three different lenses. On one side, okay, we as institutions, what kind of acceptance we want to give around climate adaptation. So what kind of risk we are taking to absorb, given our physical assets. And second point, it's more around, okay, what we can do in terms of reduction of such risks through, if you want, technology solutions, but also behavioral solutions, so we can really change also the way we leverage on those assets in order to mitigate, our exposure to climate risk. And the third component is how what kind of solutions we can deploy to transfer such risk. This is, of course, a matter of insurance solutions, but also, what kind of public scheme are potentially available to support climate adaptation, and also, how we can potentially spread the risk through financing solutions. Just a few facts which can also highlight how climate risk adaptation is taking momentum. Now, if you take the perspective of public institutions, we see today that out of 195 countries, we have roughly 125 countries globally which have defined climate adaptation plans. Then in the reality, when you look at this plan, so at least, we analyze a sample of roughly 35 plans, they've essentially not identified cost and funds behind the initiatives, so, and which also give a sense of the challenge that will be behind, these initiatives. And, the other point is that, we lack, again, prioritization behind such initiative. Then if you look at the, companies, so, today, also in terms of adaptation investments, only 1.6% of the current investments are funded by private funds. This is because, of course, it's not easy, the business case, especially, when you have to think about, short-term implications. And finally, on the investors, we see growing appetite from investors around, for example, adaptation technology, but still, there would be a big gap in terms of funds available. If you think that, in 2050, we expect, that the adaptation cost will be in the range of 500 billion US dollars per year.
C'est considérable, effectivement. Alors,
very significant indeed. Of course, we could speak about many other risks, Typhaine, but the commonality is that these risks are interconnected. They're not isolated. What is the role of risk management to fortify the resilience of organizations in the face of these interrelated risks? The timelines may be different, but they're not isolated. Yes, globalization, digitization, are based on interdependence, and the risks are interdependent. This has amplified the impact for public institutions and private organizations. There are plenty of examples. If you take the pandemic, which started up with a health crisis, then it rattled the whole global supply chain, and it even fragilized IT security with a shift to work from home. Everything is interconnected. And in parallel, each risk changes in terms of nature, frequency, and severity. We spoke about cyber attacks. Now, with the increased sophistication that AI will bring, it's clear that this risk has increased quite significantly. The world is more and more uncertain and risky for companies and institutions because some operations may come to a grinding halt. And boards of directors don't look at how risk could be managed, but how companies can become resilient in the face of plenty of interconnected risks. And the pandemic may have been a wake-up call in that regard, because it has brought resilience to the fore. And it's now necessary to have an overall vision of risk. We call it enterprise risk management. It should be embedded operationally and strategically in order to ensure the development and growth in the long term in addition to resilience. So it means setting up practical measures to mitigate the operational risk, and it means anticipation. It means using data to have real-time information and to be able to respond quickly. It means setting up disaster scenarios, and there are scenarios set up on a regular basis. Christophe, how has Valeo adapted to these risks in general?
Je pense qu'il faut être en situation d'anticiper.
I think that one should forecast all these risks. In terms of cars and vehicles, it's fairly clear there's a total transformation, and now cars are turning electric, autonomous, and with batteries. This wasn't what was happening 10 years ago. And you have to be ready for it, geared up for it, and provide for it. So there are certain risks that you just have to take for granted. And to confront these risks, you really have to throw everything at it, innovation, money, etc. You've got 8,000 engineers in IT who work on cyber risks. Well, I heard 8,000, when we were setting up this conference. Well, we have 20,000 at Valeo, and there are 8,000 who work on software. And so who are totally involved in it? Oh, yes, all of them are. And talking about cyber, maybe there are about 300, AI over 200 engineers. And we spell more than 20% of our sales in R&D, which is more than what a tech company would do. And we are very proud that we are the French company in the world with a maximum of patents that we are depositing, much more than all the other tech companies in France. So, of course, we are always providing for the future, and we believe that we can only get the future by technology, and that we can master these risks, and that's our approach at Renault. Alfonso, Natale, how do companies adapt to these new risks, and how does it impact investment decisions, organizations of supply chain and of human capital?
So I think what we are clearly discussing is that, so our companies, and also Typhaine was saying, so are really facing a very complicated landscape of multiple risks. So what we are seeing, leading organizations are currently doing is trying to have, really an holistic approach around how to basically assess all those risks in an integrated fashion. And normally we see these companies acting at least on 3 layers. On one side, what we call, response capabilities. So across, the entire organization. So if you think about, financially, operationally, in terms of product portfolio and business portfolio, I think Stefano was also mentioning, some elements here around, the challenges, for example, in the automotive space. But this is true across all the industries, around the ESG dimension, etc. So having a comprehensive perspective about your response capabilities across the organization. Second element is around what we call foresight. So the importance of having, the right capability to anticipate or to spot in advance the emergence of potential risks. And the third dimension is what we define adaptation. So how the organization is capable to adapt and adjust operating model in light of the changing landscape. Now, if you think about investment decisions, and here when we speak about investment decisions, of course, we can think about, R&D, risk, research and development. We can think about supply chain decisions, so where I should deploy my footprint. Or also if I think about, manufacturing and, suppliers, etc. It's clear that, we see more and more companies trying to reflect in those decisions scenario-based logics. So what are the likely scenarios that we see in front of us in terms of potential evolution of the risk landscape? And now, these scenarios might potentially reflect adjustments into the strategy. So in order, of course, no one has the crystal ball, so no one can really, predict what is going to happen. But for each single scenario, it's important somehow to identify, some trigger points. Okay, what are the elements, for example, of competition or geopolitical risk or cyber that can, suggest to adjust some investment decisions? And that's, I think, for sure, an element that for us, it's becoming crucial in this current environment. On supply chain, I think we touched before, the points around, strategy like, nearshoring, friendshoring. I think we discussed with the colleagues before about also how in the current, geopolitical landscape, many companies are reflecting about how to reshuffle their supply chain. Again, I think this notion of foresight is becoming important also in supply chain. I think, the importance of having technological platform, AI solutions to support essentially a better planning of supply chain, to anticipate potential disruption in terms of shortage of, components, of short of critical elements, in the supply chain is becoming important. As well as, of course, defining all the relevant strategy that could create somehow, a much more resilient supply chain. The final point I will make is on human capital, because every time we speak to our clients, I think human capital, it's one of the elements which is coming across as, most relevant. And this is true for, at least, I would say 3 dimensions. On one side, how companies can really attract, retain, and develop, the right set of talent and skills in this current environment. Because, of course, the growing exposure to risk like cyber or climate, I think is pushing companies to also think about whether they have or not in place the right skill set. And so what kind of strategy they have to deploy in order to attract those skill sets, in the future. The second element is how to make, the operating model more efficient, more agile, especially for a global organization. With the global footprint, having, an agile decision-making process is becoming crucial to react properly and promptly to the changes in the landscape. And third element, how to make, also the organization more broadly aware about the risk. Because ultimately, controlling the risk means, also stepping up, on risk culture across the organization.
Typhaine, il y a peut-être un indicateur intéressant qui reflète
Il y a peut-être there might be another indicator that could be extremely efficient, and that is to anticipate risk. Has that role changed? Has that scope been extended? Has it now become a subject discussed at the top level? Well, now the risk manager is very well known in the financial department, but then there are risk managers in all sectors, be it industry or any other sector. we believe there are 5,006 risk managers in Europe. And now to get back to the pandemic, that was really a key factor in the awareness of this resilience that was required. Okay, we have all the other risks, cyber attacks, food habits that are changing, and of course, everything else. But now the general approach to risk is a subject of administration, and the role and changes in the risk manager role is also under the hammer. It's not just the risk manager who's going to help in managing these operational risks. It's the risk manager too who will have greater responsibility towards CSR and ESG, and is supposed to include all these ESG risks in the risk cartography, anticipate certain opportunities concerning abatement of these risks, climatic risks, physical climatic risks, and help in decision making. Am I going to keep investing? Am I going to pull out? So the role of a risk manager is like an assistance, as like a supportive role for decision making at the top management level. So there's a prioritization of risks, which is important for companies with a better capacity to anticipate. Marc, Darmon, we also have another thermometer to determine risk. Do you feel that enough is being done to use it? We were talking of means, yes, well, I provide IT and cybersecurity tools, so I'm also very lucky because I'm also providing cybersecurity to the French industry at large, but it's obviously never enough. So thanks to this opportunity you're giving me, let me draw up an analogy. Cybersecurity risk is like a car insurance. You're not obliged to go through it by law, but if you have a huge accident, you really have to be covered. And it's the same thing with cybersecurity. It's just that you're in a situation where the IT manager of a company has huge budgetary issues. The digital manager is not doesn't do the same thing as he did 15 years ago, changing constantly his posts. Change in the interaction with customers, with the way of working, digitization of various processes, and all this represents a lot of work. And even cybersecurity itself. Should we use the money to count? Now, do we do the number crunching, or is it all going to be put in the cloud, or do we protect communication, essential and non-essential, or the infrastructure to prevent intrusion from all these smart hackers? Now, quite obviously, you have to do all three. So budget has to be allocated, and there's competition for these resources. And naturally, you always feel you never have enough. I've been to quite a few executive committee meetings, and there's a certain heterogeneity in the awareness of these risks. Those who've already suffered an attack and who've also suffered collateral damage because of this, they are fully aware, and they're like scalded cats. And 10 years ago, when we were under attack, you didn't talk about it, and you said, no, it isn't true, because it showed your weakness. But today, when you're attacked, you talk about it, and that helps in the monitoring the watch, and it's a proof of maturity. So it's a major change, a cultural change, and I think it answers your question. However, 81% of the companies feel that the cost of a cyber attack and criminality is too high, and it's an Accenture poll done in 2022. Now, public hospitals were really under attack. As you all know, do you feel that it's because budgets are not up to date in this public sector? I don't think I should say that. There's no real difference between prioritization in private companies and public sector. It's just that by nature, when you attack a public hospital, of course, it becomes more mediatic because it impacts everybody, and it becomes a lot more visible. I don't think I would say that the public sector is more victim to these attacks. Well, there seems to be a general feeling, and I'd like your feedback from all of you, that the technology is going to help out in the long run. Cyber attack and climate change. It's a very Anglo-Saxon approach, but increasingly you hear that carbon recapture is going to help us because it's technology that will help us. Is that true? I can't talk about carbon recapture, but I can talk about cyber tech. So we use deep tech and all that it has to offer to prevent cyber attacks. That's the base. Several use it. There's AI, quite obviously. As I said earlier, AI is generative, and that helps you to create attack scripts, and it also helps the attackers to become more imaginative, and it helps us also to put up our defenses, to increase our databases, and also prevent attacks which we haven't ever seen, a new one that hasn't been detected or hasn't been identified. And the second point, which is extremely important, is the post-attack number crunching, because we will have, as you all know, quantum theory is coming in, quantic computers are coming in, and we've got coded systems. So we need some kind of coding that'll protect us against these future quantum mechanics. So even if it's in the next 10 or 15 years, it's today that we have to code it, because there'll be data that'll still be sensitive. So this is whatever is heard and stored today could be very sensitive in the future. Christophe Périllat, do you agree that technology in the long run is going to save us? We heard Martin say that we need technology, but isn't it a bit risky to feel that you'll always have a technological solution? I think the major risk would be climate change, because that involves humanity, and this risk is just round the corner. So we really need to do something, and do something very quickly. Let's be very clear about it. Our mobility on the planet is responsible for 18% of all emissions. So if you want to decarbonize, you need to decarbonate also all that is mobility, all is transport, because that represents 18%. And technology tells us that it's ready. It's ready to take up that challenge. Electric vehicles. So electric vehicles, it provides for decarbonated mobility. So physically, or technology speaking, is saying it very clearly. It'll not be hydrogen. It'll not be synthetic fuels. It'll be a battery-based vehicle. The physics tell us that. And now the political world is also very clear. The European community says that our date now is 2050, but since there are 1.3 billion cars that have to be cleaned up, these cars still exist. So in 2050, if you want clean transport, and since a car lasts at least 15 years, we have to look back in time. We have to start right now. And that's why we are talking of 2035, because 2035 plus 15 makes 2050. And that's why we say in 2050. So we must produce only vehicles which are clean, which are green, with electricity which is green completely from end to end. So for that, we need to pick up the pace, and really immediately, because it's vital. It's a vital emergency to humanity, and that's not enough, because besides we have to recycle non-stop, repair, remanufacture, and stop digging and stop bleeding the earth. Well, we are very happy to have you with us, because Valeo is an example of how to change your risks into opportunities. You mentioned the EV. Let's talk of smart cities. You're working on that as well. It's not just about electric mobility. No, it's not that. It's just mobility in general. And mobility is not just related to a vehicle or a car. Besides, no one claims that the number of cars will keep increasing, as one used to say in the past. Just like GDP, mobility is now becoming extremely diverse, because we don't need all Earth mobility to be by cars. It could be wheels, it could be electrified, so we've done it, and we can do that to bicycles also. We can do it to the rickshaws and so on, which is what we've done in India. And then you have cars that must be lighter. The Citroën, for instance, is an example of a light vehicle, which is also with a lighter battery.
Donc, on voit bien que la mobilité.
So we can see that mobility is going to be very diversified, and we work not just on the car or the vehicle, but also 2 wheels, 3 wheels, and all sorts of other 4-wheel traffic that we might have, so that there's a solution for each. We must take this up to a level, of to a level of price which is affordable. Affordable, not have technology for the sake of technology, but solutions which are affordable. And that's exactly what we are doing. Well, you've got technology, and then you've also got regulations. We often criticize regulations, and we keep talking about this abundance of rules and regulations. But perhaps they can still help us meet certain objectives. Yes, it's true that we always tend to regulate everything, digital transition, climate change, and it's not negative in itself. It just gives you a framework, and it provides you with some sort of legal safety. So in itself, it's not negative. Of course, you just keep adding and adding and adding more and more. It's like an onion. The European Commission has committed itself to reducing by 25% all the reporting requirements. Now, that's a great break. And we do hope that the new Commission, after the European elections, will keep in mind simplification and streamlining and work on implementation. Because the last one did a lot in legislations, Green Deal, and then the EU Air Act, cyber resilience. So there were lots of laws, lots of legislation, and for different companies that implement, it is a tough deal. So they need simplification. If you look at digitization, all the big multinationals which are supposed to be critical infrastructure, they had to report to 5 different entities, and they talked about exactly the same cyber attack. Is that really required? Well, maybe you can tell us. I think we have the answer already. So you were saying that it fixes a sort of structure which is more restrictive, right, for reporting. Isn't that a good idea? Yes, it is. It makes sense because financial and non-financial reporting is put on the same level, and so we were talking about all transition, etc., and capital investment in the earlier roundtable. We need investment and we need capital inflow. So to compare activities and invest in companies that actually make this transition in ecology, we need non-financial data, which is comparable and transparent, and that's why we have this new directive. And of course, you have to clarify this idea of double materiality, as we call it, and provide guidance to help these companies to make this or provide this reporting. But that's the aim in the final analysis.
To have enough coordination, incitement on the European level to really tackle the cyber risk. Well, nationally speaking, the cybersecurity industry is 4,000 companies, 2,000 of several people. You have major groups, world leader, I represent some of them, but also SMIs, SMEs, a academic ecosystem, which is really important. All this is organized by our ANSI, which is the French NSA, defining the standards, labels, labeling the players with whom we have to work, but also acts in itself to make sure of the national resilience. National resilience, it's the vital operators, the essential ones, the SMIs, and our administrations. We have an ANSI who really ramped up for the past decade. And people would like to have the same in terms of certification, also in operation. Yeah, but French, well, Europe. European level, it's not like the defense where we need to regroup to have an activity or even a position vis-à-vis a conflict. There are few attacks which are really European. We need each and every one of our industry to be protected and be protected where they are their core business. They can be on several countries. They don't have a European answer. The priority is the certification and the alignment, and the French standards are more demanding than the European colleagues. By tradition, the French are more sovereign. They wish to be listened by our friends. Our norms, our standards are more demanding, and we have to fight to have those higher hand on that. Well, you will have to conclude, and you're the proof that you can transform those risks and opportunities. What is your message to the CEOs who are following us and who are facing risks which are interconnected with not the same agenda that will cost them a tremendous amount of money? I'll answer to your question, but if I can jump on what said previously, to listen in the same sentence, reporting mission of 25% and SRD has hundreds of indexes or KPIs. We industrialists do not need all those KPIs to monitor and to follow the path that we have to go, reducing the CO2. Eventually, it can be only one index. How much to extract coal? We extracted more coal in 23 rather than 22. Coal, fossil energy, the most releasing of greenhouse gas effects, and the petrol consumption is ramping up. Each company knows at the end of the year how to calculate more or less precisely. The rules are not exactly the same ones are followed. We know how to monitor very precisely the gas release that we generate and that our products are generating. This is easy. That's concrete. That's material. And we can work on that and work on the roadmap, which would be precise, clear, to reduce, again, in all the companies, the release of CO2. No much risks there. I'm convinced that the major risk, the one that we put on top of all the others, is the climate risk. We have to be there as fast as possible. Each and every industry really should go and putting all the technology, the innovation, the money required. That's what we try to do at Valeo in the value chain within which we are in. And this is what the industrialists should do in a with perseverance. It's a complex way, but it's absolutely mandatory. Thanks to the four of you for taking part in this panel. Typhaine Beaupérin, Chief Executive Officer of the Federation of Risk Management Association. Thanks, Marc Darmon. I forgot part of your title. You're Senior Vice President at Thales. You're also CEO of the Industrial Security Industry. Thank you, Alfonso Natale. You are partner at Mckinsey. Christophe Périllat, Chief Executive Officer of Valeo. Thank you for your presence.
Ainsi s'achève.
This is the end of the morning session. Thanks for all those who followed us this morning remotely. All of our talks will be available in replay. If you came in late, you'll be able to listen to it from A to Z. All the teams of GoFast are ready to answer your questions about risk management. This is the topic of this 28th Symposium GoFast. For those in the room, in the audience, good news, you'll be able to have a buffet lunch. We resume at 2:30 local time for the second part of the day with topical meetings.